Hello, I'm Jonathan Palmer, Executive Director for Hallie Q Community Center in St. Paul. I'm coming to you today with Secretary of State Steve Simon to have a conversation just about the upcoming election and election process overall. Steve is Minnesota's 22nd Secretary of State. He is the Chief Elections Administrator, and he pledged in his inaugural address to work with anyone of any political affiliation from any part of our state to protect, defend, and strengthen the right to vote in Minnesota. Before being elected as Minnesota Secretary of State, Steve served in the Minnesota House of Representatives for 10 years, and he spent much of his time in the state legislature immersed in election issues. He played a lead role in many of the election reforms that Minnesota has embraced over the last several years. He lives with his wife, Leah, in Hopkins, and their 2 children, Hannah and Noah, and their rescue dog, Hugo. Hello, Mr. Secretary.
Hey, great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
We're very glad to have you here and to be able to share this information out with the community.
Can I say one quick thing before we get into questions? I have a sentimental attachment to Hallie Q Community Center. My father, who passed away a couple of years ago, but was born in 1933, grew up in St. Paul. And he always recounted his fond memories of playing basketball as a kid in a league at what he then called the Hallie Q Brown House. It's now a community center, but in the 30s and 40s, it was the Hallie Q Brown House. And he always talked about it. And just great memories. And so I have a soft spot.
Thank you so much. That is a wonderful part of our history. And yes, noting the Hallie Q Brown House, that is something that we'll have to circle back with you on because of our community archive, which is chronicling the history of Hallie Q Brown. So we may have a picture of your father in our archive that we can share with you.
Excellent.
Wonderful. So I'm going to jump right on into some of the questions. Our first up is, why don't you just tell us a little bit about the Office of Secretary of State? What is your primary job?
Yeah, well, we wear a few hats in the office, and let me focus on kind of the 3 biggest ones. The first thing that we do is we handle a lot of business registration. So if you're starting a business in Minnesota, the first thing that you do before you get a license or insurance or anything is you got to file the business, the name. And you do that with our office. And then after you're in business, there are a lot of other related documents that are filed with our office. So we're kind of the welcome mat for Minnesota businesses, help the wheels of commerce go around, and we're proud of that function. A second thing that we do, a second main function, is we run something called the Safe at Home program. Safe at Home is an address confidentiality program for victims of domestic violence or stalking or other crimes. It allows them to keep their home address secret, totally private. Nobody knows where they actually live except them and us and whoever they choose to tell. So we help them get their life back on track. The third thing that we do, and the thing that I think you're going to want to talk about, no question about it, it attracts the most attention, the most scrutiny, and the most interest, particularly at a time like this, and that is the elections function. We serve as the Chief Elections Administrator for Minnesota. Here's what we don't do. We don't count any of the votes. Never have, never will. We don't purchase any of the tabulating equipment. We don't hire any of the people that you see in the polling place. All that happens at cities and counties, but we do oversee that system. We do all the work at the legislature. We do budget stuff. We certify the equipment. We certify the results after election night. So we like to say that we're in the democracy business, and it is a heck of a time to be in the democracy business, that's for sure.
Most definitely. This is probably one of the most important elections coming up this year, and I know there's a lot of excitement around it, a lot of interest. Maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the pieces around that. What's like the deadline to register? Can people register at their polling place? Do they need to bring identification to vote in person?
Yeah, well, that's a great place to start, just talking about voter registration. So fortunately in Minnesota, we're one of only 16 states that has this. We have what's called election day or same day voter registration. Really, really a game changer, super convenient. If you're not registered at all, or if you once were, or you need to change it because you moved or had a name change, whatever the reason is, you can do it on game day, on election day. You just go to your polling place. And if you don't know where that is, we have a great website. It's mnvotes.org. That's mnvotes.org. And you go to that website, type in your address, it'll tell you where to go. So what does this voter registration stuff mean? It's this technical sounding term. I want to take away all the mystery of it. All voter registration is, it's super easy, first of all it is you got to show two things. That's it, two things. You are who you say you are, and you live where you say you live. That's it. And Minnesota law is really forgiving and generous about what you can use. It's not just a driver's license. Some people don't have that. So we have a long list of things you can use. And if you go to mnvotes.org, you can see a long list. I mean, it is a long list, not just a driver's license. You can use an expired or an out-of-state driver's license to show the you are who you say you are part. And on the you live where you say you live part, you can use the utility bill, and you can use something we call vouching in Minnesota. Only a very few states have that. It means you can find someone in your neighborhood who will vouch for you, who will sign an oath under penalty of perjury saying, I swear up and down that this person lives at wherever. And they're on the hook for a big penalty if they're lying. So I have indirect personal experience with this. My parents downsized when my sister and I were grown up, and they moved to a place in late October. They didn't even have a utility bill yet. Of course, their driver's license hadn't been changed. So my dad could not have voted in a governor's race one year unless he had a neighbor go to the polls and vouch for him. It's pretty common. So that's a cool feature of our law. Again, this term voter registration, there's all this mystery around it. That's it. You are who you say you are. You live where you say you live. Long list of things you can use to prove either or both of those.
Let me follow up on that. So you just sparked an idea with me around that. That seems just so easy and so simple and straightforward and very helpful for ensuring people have the right to vote. What has been in the press a lot, what has been said by some elected officials is about voter fraud and voter, all sorts of machinations that would come up around that. When you're talking about people being able to vouch for somebody, or you're talking about registering with a license, how do you prevent voter fraud, or is voter fraud an issue that we need to be concerned about?
So just to show you how minimal it is, a federal judge last week or the week before did in some court case, went back and looked at the records in Minnesota since 1979, 41 years worth of elections. And she included in her analysis, this is a federal court in a judicial decision, published decision. She concluded that our rate of fraud in Minnesota was, get ready, 0.000004%. That's 0.5 zeros and the number 4. So look, anything more than 1, we don't want, okay? We want it to be absolute 0, but that is a really, really good record. And it's because we have security procedures in place, because it's a felony to register fraudulently or vote fraudulently, because word gets out, because we do checks after the election and we are going to find out if someone double voted or voted when they weren't supposed to or voted for someone else. We have a paper trail, we do those audits, and that is something that has really stood the test of time. So we have a system in Minnesota, we like to say, where it's easy to vote and hard to cheat.
Thank you very much. That is really helpful, and it's great to know that the percentage has been that small. And so this is something definitely to always be mindful of, but in terms of the impact and in terms of having been here, it's just such a small percentage.
Yeah.
What about people who are worried about their health? I mean, we're dealing with a pandemic. A lot of people are, social distancing. We've seen some of the images online of people, having to create enough space. Are there other options for voting besides going to their polling place?
Absolutely. There are 3 major ways to vote. One is going to your polling place on election day. And again, if you don't know where to go, mnvotes.org is the website. You just type in your address and it'll tell you where that is. A community center, a church, whatever. That's number 1. Number 2 is to vote in person early. So you get the in-person experience, but not on election day. So fewer people. And it's typically, not always, a city or a county office. where you go. And to decide where that is for you, again, mnvotes.org, and say, hey, where do I go? Is it my city hall? Is it the county courthouse? What is it? It'll tell you where to go. And there you can vote in person absentee. The third way to vote, which has gained a lot of popularity because of COVID-19, is to vote from home. This is nothing new. This is nothing radical. We've had this for a long, long time, but people are really catching on to it this year. And there you go to that same website, mnvotes.org, and order the ballot to come to you at home. It will be mailed to you at home. And the rule this year is you can send that back in the mail or hand deliver it up until November 3rd. So you can actually pop it in the mail November 3rd, as long as it arrives a week later by November 10th. That's a really forgiving rule this year. That's not the normal rule, but that's the COVID-19 2020 rule. So there are three really great ways to vote. All of them are equally legitimate, equally worthy, and it just depends on the personal preference of any individual voter.
That is wonderful, because that gives a lot of opportunity, and people, I think, will be very interested to know that there's more than just going to their polling place and ways in which they can engage and exercise their civic rights. Thinking about that, we've got a lot of noise also, again, in the press about campaigns hiring polling challengers. We've talked a little bit about voter fraud, voter disenfranchisement. Can you outline kind of what's acceptable activity at polling places and what people should know about voting rights?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, because it gives me an opportunity to clarify here. The good news is when it comes to poll watchers, Minnesota law is really clear and really specific, and in a good way that protects voters. Here's what I mean. When you hear campaigns or candidates say, hey, I want my supporters to go and show up to the polling place and be poll watchers or challengers. In Minnesota, we call them challengers, to try to challenge either the vote count or challenge individual voters' eligibility. Here's the rule in Minnesota, super crystal clear. Every major political party in Minnesota gets to designate only one person, maximum of one, for the polling place, and they must be designated in writing. So you can't send 20 there or 10 there or 2 there. You can send them, they're not going to be allowed in. Let's put it that way. You can only allow 1 in. They've got to be designated by writing. So you can't just show up. No one can show up and say, hey, let me in. I'm the Democratic challenger, or I'm the Republican challenger. Nope, it's got to be in writing by a party unit. Next, once they get inside the polling place, that one person, and one person only per party, they're pretty limited. They can't come within 6 feet of a voter. They can't come within 6 feet of a piece of elections equipment. They can't speak to a voter. And any challenge that they make to a voter's eligibility has to be in writing, and here's the best part, has to be based on personal knowledge. That's the exact phrase in the law, personal knowledge. So, for example, if a challenger was in a polling place, it would be okay for the challenger to say, hey, wait a minute, I know her. She lives in my neighborhood. I know her parents. She's 17 years old. I know it. She's not even 18. I'm challenging her. She's not an eligible voter. Or I know that guy. He lives on our block. At our block party a couple of years ago, he was showing everyone his Norwegian passport. He's not even American. I'm challenging him. That's fine. That's based on something you know. It's personal knowledge. What's not okay is to challenge a voter by, for example, saying, hey, I know her, or not I know her, but that one that just walked in, she doesn't look right to me. Or that guy over there, I heard him speaking a language other than English in the hallway. He must not be a citizen, or I'm guessing he's not a citizen. You can't make a challenge based on a hunch or a whim or a guess or a bad feeling or a vibe or whatever. That will not be accepted. So that is pretty pro-voter. That is pretty pro-voter protection. Everyone has the right to vote in a place that is calm, peaceful, free of intimidation, interference, harassment. And we have a really good record of that in Minnesota because we have good laws.
Wonderful. Another follow-up coming off of that, as we're anticipating, I'm sure that we're going to have a record voter turnout this year. People will get in line, but we've also seen online images of people waiting in lines for long hours, it taking a long time to vote. If somebody shows up to vote and they get in line, will at some point they be cut off and not allowed to vote? Will they have their right to vote?
No, you will get your right to vote. Minnesota polls close at 8 p.m. However, if you're in line by 8 p.m., you're good. So don't worry. If you're in line by 8 p.m. and you don't get to vote till sometime after that, well after that, too bad for anyone trying to get you out of line. You are in line by 8 p.m., you are good to go. On the subject of lines, knock on wood here, but that has not typically been an issue in Minnesota. You don't see scenes in Minnesota typically, like you do in so many of these other states. Now, it might look a little bit deceptively similar to those other states this time because people will be 6 feet apart. So imagine a line that is only 5 people is going to have to be at least 30 feet. It's going to look really, wow, look at this line. But just like lines that we're all seeing at, the grocery store or Target or whatever, that can be a little deceptive. So no, we have enough polling places in Minnesota. We have a lot of polling places. We have 3,000 of them throughout the state. So we're not one of these states that's been cutting down on polling places drastically and increasing the ratio. Plus, the other thing going on this year is so many people have requested an absentee ballot to come to them at home that the numbers at the polling places are just going to be lower. Today, we announced this morning, the freshest numbers, we have about 1.7 million voters, 1.7 million, who will be voting absentee in some form or fashion. We're expecting about 3.1, maybe 3.2 million voters. So pretty reliably over half the voters this year. That is shocking. Over half will not even be there on election day. So even with the 6-foot social distancing, there is such a dent that has been put in same day voting this year by people who want to vote from home that I think will overcome even any possible delays or lag time.
That brings also an interesting follow-up with that. All of these absentee ballots have to come in and be counted. What is kind of that process? What happens when somebody sends in their absentee ballot?
Yeah. So when you send in the absentee ballot, let's say, and you could start doing that September 18th. And let's say you send it in right away. You got it at home on September 18th or shortly after that, you send it in right away. Well, it sort of sits there for a while. And then starting 2 weeks before the election, local folks in the counties and cities, and that date was Tuesday the 20th, local folks can start opening them up and feeding the ballots into machines. So as we speak, they're being processed. And we already have over 1 million that have come in. It's almost 1.2 million, in fact, that have come already. So on election night, you're going to see a total that reflects both the in-person vote that day and everyone whose ballot has come in so far. Now, remember, I mentioned earlier we have this postmark rule this year. So 100% of the ballots aren't going to come in until they won't all be in for another week after election day, but a huge majority will be in by election night.
And that brings up a very interesting question that may be a little tough to answer, but I'm going to put it out to you. When will election results be available?
Yeah, no, that's a totally fair question. So here's what I want to say about that. By definition, because of this new postmark rule this year, we won't have 100% of ballots in totally for a week. But I want to say a couple things about that. Number one, when you see that on election night, it looks and feels different because we won't have instant gratification. We won't have everything, absolutely everything in on election night. When you see that, I think everyone should just know that that is by design, literally by design of the legislature, which passed a special bill this year allowing for the election, and by design of the courts, which have issued some statewide orders that change and tweak our normal calendar for counting and reporting this year. And we're not alone, by the way. Minnesota is not an island. It's not like every other state's a different way. Most states will be like us this year. So that's number one. It's by design. So don't think that, oh my gosh, all the votes aren't in. Who screwed up or who was lazy or who failed to plan ahead or whatever. That's not it. This is the plan. This is the plan that the courts and the legislature wanted this year because of COVID. Number two, to your point, just because the last vote won't be in for a week doesn't mean that we're all going to be standing around for 7 days wondering who won all the offices. That's not going to happen. Instead, I think the vast majority of winners, of outcomes, will be known earlier rather than later. If not on election night, then they'll be known shortly thereafter because a huge percentage is going to come in right away. We're also going to be able to give information and data on outstanding absentee ballots, meaning, okay, here's what's in so far. Here's what was sent out but hasn't come back yet. It's going to come back in the following week, metered out over the days. We don't know what day it's going to come in, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, up to the next Tuesday. But here's the number that are still outstanding. We're going to be able to report that down to the Minnesota House District. And so that'll give folks a lot of tools in the news media or any pundit to call contests and call races. So I think most will be like that, not the nail biters where we're waiting for the last day, the last hour, the last vote.
And since you'll know how many people have registered to vote, you'll be able to put those numbers against the number of people who have registered to be able to predict percentages and call elections once they get to the point that it actually passes the amount that they need to, right?
Exactly. I mean, here's a hypothetical that I've sort of thought about. Let's say that a person is following a particular Minnesota State House contest, District ABC, whatever it is. And let's say on election night, candidate A is ahead of candidate B by 500 votes. But let's say on election night, our office is also able to report that we know that in that district, there are 300 outstanding absentee ballots, meaning ballots that went out to voters, they just haven't come in yet because they don't have to. They have a week to get it back. So we know there are 300 out there. Well, there is an example of a race that can be called, right? We know that candidate A is ahead by 500 votes. Even if all 300 of the ones that were outstanding went for her opponent, we know that she's won. We won't know for a week by how much she's won. That's true. We won't know whether she won by a little or a lot. That is absolutely true. But we'll know mathematically that she's won. And I think most contests will be like that rather than the nail biters that require us to wait till the end.
Wonderful. Is there anything else you'd like Minnesotans to know about the election or your office?
Yeah, I just want to say this. There have been some other reports out there about, there was one prominent national report about some out-of-state non-Minnesota employment agency that was advertising to have members, ex-members of the military come to Minnesota to guard polling places. We've gotten briefed on that by federal and state law enforcement. They now believe there is no credible threat related to that ad for a lot of reasons that they can go into, not me. So we're vigilant. There are a lot of people around the state with eyes on that. You know, everyone has a right in a polling place to be left alone, to have a peaceful environment where they can vote without fear of interference or intimidation. And that's what we aim to deliver to Minnesotans. And that's what we've had for years and decades. So any other questions by any viewers, go to mnvotes.org. That's where you can find out where your polling place is, either on election day or beforehand. That's where you can find out what or who is on your ballot. If you're not sure just what's up this year, you know, are we voting for county commissioner or state senator, or what are the offices we're voting on this year? You can go there as well. That's where you can go to order the ballot to come to you. It's not too late. That's where you can go to track your ballot to make sure if you send it by mail that it arrives and know the date it arrives. So there's a lot of good stuff on there, mnvotes.org.
And is that where they can go to track election results as well and see them as they tabulate in?
Yes, exactly. So if you're interested in election night results, like I am, you're going to be hitting refresh a lot on that website, which is mnvotes.org that night and for the following week as we update the totals daily that come in from the counties. You can go to mnvotes.org to track election results as well.
Thank you so much. This has been very informative and something I think that will be very helpful for the community to understand and to know about. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
We've been talking with Secretary of State Steve Simon. I'm Jonathan Palmer with Hallie Q Community Center. Thank you. Get out and vote.